putting it onto the Moodle part of recording, but you can still get in. I haven't taken them off the site, so if you use the URLs that you've actually got, you can actually get into the past webinars that we've actually done. I will try and find out what the problem is and actually upload it into the Moodle area as well, as soon as I know how to get the drivers for streaming it from Moodle. So there we are. Welcome, and welcome to Leon. Now, we never know with project management what's around the corner. There's always something that's unexpected in project management. And so what is it, and what are the things that actually make a project a success? Well, there are three things that actually keep a project in measurement, and these are the things that are measured how a project is measured. There's actually three ways, and I don't quite agree with this one, and I'll draw what I think is slightly different. But there are three areas here where it says scope. We could also put deliverables, but certainly time and cost form the three legs of a triangle. Now, if we as project managers can keep those three things in place, the deliverables, the cost, and the time, it's the three things that we've got to balance. So I believe that the quality is all three of those in balance. Then we have a really quality project. So I would probably do something like this. If I was drawing this one, I would draw something like this. And I would put quality in the middle here, you see. Oh, I haven't got quite the right thing there. And then this one, I would say, although they say scope, I think what it possibly would be better is if we said deliverables. If we kept all of those three in place, okay, there we are. Now, there are some other ones that help with project success, and the first one is the strategic alignment to the business operations. There's a really good list in your project management book. I can't remember exactly what page, but strategic alignment to the business operations, as long as that is aligned to business operations, we will actually have success. Also endorsed and communicated consistent applied methodology. Now that's the project methodology, is just what I've shown you on this triangle. So if we can keep that applied consistently, we are going to have a successful project. Another criteria for project success are transparent approvals. In other words, if everyone can see how something was approved, especially when things go slightly out of whack. Now, if we go back to my triangle, and if we push on one of those triangles, it's going to either push the time out or the cost out, or both of them out. So to keep that transparent, a change management system needs to be implemented. So we need to have transparent approvals and decision making accountability. Real-time performance measurement. A project management information system on big projects is absolutely critical. So we need to look at those. Now there are a few more of those, and I would suggest that if you went to Stephen Hartley's book, you would actually find a good list of those project success factors. I don't want to take too much about it. otherwise we're not going to get through tonight. But if we can keep our time, and our quality and our deliverables in place, we will certainly have a successful project. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the anatomy of a process. PMBOK, in their methodology, believe that there are 44 processes. Now, I'm not going to get into those 44 processes tonight. Actually, I'm going to get into the 5 most important ones, which we actually call the life cycle, the project life cycle. But before I do, I just want to go back and talk about the anatomy of a process. You cannot have a process if you don't have inputs. And in the middle of those are your tools and techniques, or your methodologies, or you're going to process something. And then on the output, there must be an output. Now, project managers need to look at these processes or phases. And to divide them up this way gives you a good way to do it. There is another methodology called Prince 2, and they have 8 core processes. Whereas the PMBOK prefer to see the 5 groupings of processes. Prince 2 actually concentrates on the inputs and the outputs. Now, we're going to look at quite a lot at that tonight, because I think if we can get that fixed in our minds and we can understand the phasing of the processes, we can actually understand quite a few things about project management and to get the right things at the right time. It's on this level that we often see projects failing. So let's have a look at this. The 5 process groups, and they call them process groups, or they call it the life cycle. If you look at the blue book, Stephen Hartley likes to call it the project life cycle, and I'm going to sometimes use it as the project process groups, or I'm going to call it the project life cycle. So they are the 5 major core processes. And the other areas that we've talked about are the 9 knowledge areas. And this often confuses people. So we have these 2 fridge magnets, 5 process groups, 9 knowledge areas. How do these things interface? Why is it like this? And I think it should become clear tonight exactly how these interface. Let's have a look at these 5 groups. And we're going to see this right throughout the night, so we're going to see it. The first one is initiating. Initiating is the time that the project is conceived. Something must come up, and there's going to be some decision making of whether this will actually take place or not. So initiating is your first phase, and everything else is dependent on this initiation. If this initiation is not done correctly, you are almost doomed from the beginning. The second one is planning. Now, what you're going to see tonight is that a major part of the project is actually spent on planning. There's a huge proportion of projects actually time spent on planning. Now, I can remember asking people to raise their hands, how many people work in a functional organization? And I said that internal projects in a functional organization leaves the project manager in a very precarious situation. And it is these 2 phases, or these 2 process groups, or major processes, that are going to actually help you to actually define the project, or if you like, a governance structure to actually run the rest of the project. So the other 3 areas are fairly easy, and we can actually remember them. The first one is the executing of the project. The second one is the controlling of the project. And then the final one that always causes a problem with project management is actually the closeout. Now, strangely enough, a project might be very successful, but perceived to be a poor project because of a poor closeout. And that's because what hasn't been done is that the alignment hasn't been put back into the business. In other words, the stakeholders do not perceive the value of the project. To get the value of the project, it's really important to go back to the beginning, what was supposed to be initiated, and align what you've got on the closing, and make sure that your stakeholders actually understand what you said you were going to do in the beginning actually took place. If that doesn't happen, it leaves gaps within many stakeholders. Even if the client or the sponsor see it as a good project, many of the stakeholders that are not informed because of a bad closeout will actually always see it as a negative. So I really want to reiterate 3 areas: the initiating, the planning, and the closeout as being critical to the success of a project. We can take it down to 3 areas. We can see it: the planning, the monitoring and control, the implementation. I don't know why they put it exactly like that, but that's how PMBOK sees it. So let's look at it again now. Fridge magnets. There are 5 process groups. There are 44 processes in the PMBOK body of knowledge, and there are 9 knowledge areas. How these actually fit together is what we're going to discuss tonight. Alright, let's look at the 9 areas. We have communication management and we have cost management. We have scope management. We have time management. We have risk management. We have HR management. We have procurement management. And these all fit together with quality and project integration. Now if we look at that, that's exactly how the diploma is structured in those knowledge areas. But what we need to get tonight are 2 things: the project process and project integration. How does the project integrate with the various areas? So those are 2 critical aspects that we need to discuss tonight. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Just to put another perspective on this one, and that is the professional and social responsibility of a project manager. And PMBOK would not like to leave us out. And the reason why I'm saying this is that not only would I like to see you get your diploma, but I'd also like to see you prepared for the PMI certification. And if you're well prepared for the certification, it really means writing the exam, and actually then you get an international, besides an Australian recognized qualification, you will also get the PMI recognition as well. So let's look at that as well. And one of the areas that they see is the professional social responsibility. Now, what they see as professional and social responsibility is that to ensure individual integrity, to contribute to the project management knowledge base, that's that PMBOK body of knowledge. In other words, if you want to become a certified project manager, then they would expect you to contribute towards the knowledge base that they have built up and are continuing to build, to enhance your personal professional competence constantly, and to promote interaction among stakeholders. Now, the process groups and the knowledge areas are different ways to organize these processes, but they do not really overlap with each other. And we must be careful to try and make them fit together. Right? However, again, Stephen Hartley has actually put a little diagram together. Let me just get that page. I have it here. Has put a little diagram together in order to show you how they interact with one another, which would be good to read. Nope, I don't have it here. I thought I had the phases. But there is in his, oh, there it is. On page 29, you'll find that. On page 29. Now, project process groups. Let's have another look at this. Let's look at the initiating, the planning, the executing, the controlling, and the closing. You'll see I've got little hats for each one of those. That's just to bring you, when we're putting these things together as we go through this evening, those little hats will actually help you identify where we're at. Okay? And there you see the top parts of those. Now, let's look at integration management and see how it fits together with the project life cycle. Okay? In the project integration management, we're going to develop a project charter. A project charter, as I will describe later, brings together what are you going to do. This is your project charter is going to decide is a document that's going to help you decide whether to continue or not to continue. It's going to give you as the project manager the authority to do something, or if you like, it's going to give you the mandate. And within that project group, you're going to develop a project charter. You're going to develop a preliminary scope statement. You're going to develop the project management plan. You're going to direct and manage the project execution. You're going to monitor and control the work. And you're going to look at integrated change control. And most importantly, you're going to do a closing out. Now you see my little red dots are going to go right throughout this one. And you're going to see that these integrate from different perspectives. If we look at scope management, which is the second part, which is BSB521A, what you will see, or the scope management, you will see the process groups on these ones. There's scope planning, which comes under planning. You'll see scope definition, which comes under planning. You'll see creating a work breakdown structure, which comes under planning. And then you'll see scope verification and scope control, which is really monitoring and control. Monitoring and control. So that is how the scope management will actually integrate into your project life cycle. When we get into time management, again, you're going to see planning comes up and dominates again. Activity definition, activity sequencing, activity resource estimation, activity duration estimation. And then when we get into monitoring and control, we need to schedule the development and schedule the control. We look at cost management. Planning dominates again. Cost estimating, cost budgeting, and then obviously cost control. Once we don't have a dominance of planning, but rather a rather balanced view, and that's the project quality management. We plan parts of the project of planning. We're going to plan how we're going to do quality, and then we perform quality assurance and quality control. So we will see those two when we get to quality management. When we come to human resource management, it's also fairly balanced as well. The human resource, the planning part of it, we'll look at the planning aspects of it in the planning part of it, the acquiring of the project team, the development of that project team, and then the managing of that project team. So if we look at communications management, we see the planning, communications planning, the information distribution, performance reporting, and management stakeholders. Let's look at risk management. Really dominated by planning again. If we don't plan the risk, it becomes very difficult to actually control your risk if you haven't really looked at some of the aspects of risk planning and looked at it from many different angles. If you can pre-plan it and do some things again, in other words, mitigate the risk of that of the project, it often leads to project failure. Now I just want to say some things a little bit on this one before we go on. In risk management, the higher the cost of the project, the more strategic it becomes, the more risky it becomes. Right? Let me try and give you an example. If we look at the impact of a project and the time of the project, if those two are shortened, so in other words, what we're saying is, if we're saying that the impact is going to impact the organization as a whole, and you have a short time scale for that, what you're going to find is that you're going to have a very, very high risk project. Most strategic projects are high risk because we don't know the outcome. So risk management planning is a very, very important part of project management. In fact, right throughout the whole project, as a project manager, it is a responsibility of yours to highlight to the client and to the sponsor the risks as soon as they arise. It's often the risk, a hazard becoming a reality that could terminate a project. And I can think of a couple of that I can remember where the project was terminated because the risk became too high. So risk plays a very important role in project management. Procurement management is incredibly important, especially when it comes to outsourcing and buying in expertise and buying in portions of the product. And what really comes back is the planning, the terms of reference that you're going to have. If that is well defined up front and people understand where they're going, that is really good. SLAs defined up front are really a good way to start, but that is the base. What you really need to do is get from an SLA to value responses, and to try and get your vendor or supplier to see the value in the project as well, not just trying to meet some sort of service level agreement. Otherwise, you're going to get a mediocre response from your vendors and suppliers. Right. Now we've come to that, let's look at our initiating from a different perspective. Once we've looked at the inputs to something, we look at conducting different selection methods. We define the scope in the initiating phase. We document project risks and assumptions and constraints. We identify and perform stakeholder analysis. We develop a project charter. We obtain the project charter approval before we can go on to planning. In the planning part or phase, which is dependent upon all of those previous ones, we cannot go on to planning without having a project charter approval, because you don't have the mandate to continue with the project. In the planning phase, you're going to define and record the requirements and the constraints and the assumptions again, and you're going to define them in much more detail. You're going to identify the project team and define the roles and responsibilities. You're going to create the work breakdown structure. You're going to develop your change management plan. You're going to identify your risks and define risk strategies. you're going to obtain the plan approval. And you can't go on to the next phase until you've got a good plan approval. A project plan that goes into the execution before this is really understood is doomed to failure. And of course, we always have a kickoff meeting. A kickoff meeting, the way the kickoff meeting is always responded is actually critical to how the rest of the project is going to be. It's going to set the tone for the rest of the project. In executing, we look at executing the tasks as defined in the project plan, ensuring a common understanding, and continually measuring and monitoring expectations. A critical part of your execution of a project is actually managing expectation. A good stakeholder analysis is critical for this one. If you've done your stakeholder analysis correctly, you will be able to manage expectations very well. If you haven't, you're going to have a problem in managing expectations. This is the phase that you're going to implement your procurement and manage those resources. We're going to look at this in much more detail, but remember, in a functional organization, managing that resource allocation is going to be very, very difficult. So we need to look at how we manage resource allocation. And then we need to implement project management, the quality management plan. And finally, we implement changes and approve changes. It's important to monitor at this stage the team performance. And if we're looking at, whoops, I don't know why we went so quickly to controlling. Oh dear, my slides have skipped one out here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about controlling as well. Now, controlling, we're actually going to see a little bit more about it tonight, so I'm actually not too worried here at this stage. But closing is to obtain the final acceptance for a project. It's the time when you put to bed all those expectations and make sure that they are happy. We make sure that there are no outstanding financial loose ends or legal loose ends or even administrative. We look at the release of project resources. We identify the document and communicate the lessons learnt. Now, Graham, this is where a project management office can actually help and help us enormously, especially when one project after another project is completed. Those combined lessons learnt and that knowledge base becomes a real boon for an organization. So we'll talk about the project management office a little bit later and how these things will fit in. This is where we create and distribute the final project report, and we archive and retrain all our project records. Isn't there a saying, the job is not done until the paperwork is done? And this is really what we're doing, is we are finalizing everything and realigning the goals and making sure that it's met the strategic objectives. And here we measure also the customer satisfaction. That will also help us with future projects as well, and the lessons learnt. We've been through this one already, so I'm just going to quickly click through it. Alright, I've come to the end of the first part of looking at the project lifecycle. Are there any questions so far? Anyone have any questions? If you just raise your hand, I'll give you the microphone. Okay. Colin, you have the microphone.
Yeah, how he's going? Just wondering.
Good, thanks, Colin. Good, thanks, Colin.
With a large organisation, there's probably a lot of different levels of management that might have input into those different life cycle stages. Is that right?
That's right. Unfortunately, it's a bit hard in 1 hour a week to actually cover a lot of the methods and techniques. But a stakeholder analysis is a very important thing to do. So, can you just repeat your question again there, Colin?
Yeah, it was just wondering about the amount of different managers or different individuals that might be involved in the different life cycle stages, as far as initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing out. Whereas in a small organisation, it might only be one or two individuals and maybe a director.
In most cases, I think you're absolutely right. However, when you're looking at those phases, the project manager, a project manager starts with the initiation and he ends with the closeout, and that's the difference from a functional organization. You're going to stay with a particular project all the way through. And if you can remember last week when we talked about it, we talked about how is it that different organizations do implement projects within the organization. And as a project manager, you start with the initiation and you end at the end. Your project team, however, is going to have the expertise of that project. So they will be the subject matter experts. But you might also have some soft experts on it. You might have somebody from human resources, for example, assisting you, especially if it's an internal project and it demands change within the organization. You might have somebody from organizational development to help you, someone that's an expert on change management and change and helping people through change. If it's a technological problem, there might be someone assisting you on implementing those technology changes. So that's the way that I would actually see it. In a large organization, Colin, you would have a project office, and that's when the difference between a program and a project. A project is something that's defined and that has a start and a finish. A program is a group of projects put together. Now, in larger organizations, it's unlikely to have multiple or a lot of multiple projects in a small organization. The impact is often too great. So you will have one or two projects within perhaps a small organization, but in larger organizations with a lot of projects happening at once, what you would have is that you would have multiple projects all acting in various areas at the same time. And those projects would be grouped into various areas, and you would have a program manager over those ones. I could think in civil construction, a large civil construction company would have a number of road making projects. They might have a number of bridge building projects. They might have a number of building projects. So, and they would probably be grouped together and put together in a program. So a program would be a group of projects that would have a particular financial impact on some area of a company. And I think that was one of your questions that you actually asked me. I'm not sure that answers you fully, but it's a quick answer for tonight. We'll probably answer that more in the question and answer session. Is there anything more? Okay, can we go on? Let's look at project integration management. In project integration management, we're looking at integrating all those 9 areas in the project life cycle. Okay, so if we have a look at some of the tasks that you would do in project integration, we'd look at developing a project charter, which is part of initiating. We'd look at developing a preliminary scope statement. We would look at the project management plan. What is the project management plan? We'd look at directing and managing the execution. We're looking at monitoring and controlling the project work. We're looking at integrating the change control over all those phases, and we're looking at the closeout of that project. So what are we saying is, in the project life cycle, if we look at project integration, it's really the life cycle of the project. It's looking at a project from a process perspective. Okay, does that make sense? If it makes sense to you, I will go on. If it doesn't, so if you raise your hands and what I've said makes sense, I'll go on. Otherwise, I'll give some more explanation. How's that? Okay, we got one. We got two. We got Will. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Okay, Leon. I've given you the microphone, Leon. All right, let's go on. Leon, do you have a... Leon, can I go on, or would you like to... Have you got a comment? It looks like I can't really hear you there. Oh, you don't have a mic, I forgot. Yes, sorry, Leon, I forgot about that. Okay. I'm going to have to get you one. All right, let's go on. So the rest of this evening, we're going to look at project integration. We're going to look at these areas specifically. Again, unfortunately, because of a shortage of time, we're going to skim over this. But throughout this phase, we can actually, it's going to raise the questions, and I will, especially for next year, look at actually assisting you getting further into some areas of depth, especially in the question and answer sessions. So let's go on. Let's look at the life cycle. I'm going to draw it slightly differently. All right, this time I'm going to draw it with the needs, the initiating, the planning, and we go into a cycle of control and initiating. We go into executing, and we go to closing. All right, so there's a cycle: planning, executing, control, planning, executing, control, and then we go out of a project. That's how we're going to look at it from this part of it in the project integration and how we integrate it. Now, we always start with the needs in the project life cycle. So this is where stakeholder analysis becomes a vital part of our project. I also mentioned to you that the more strategic a project is, in other words, the bigger impact it has on the organization, the riskier it becomes. Now, I'd just like to refer you back also to the textbook. So when you're looking at these things and you're trying to do it, in this part, Stephen actually does a really good job of actually looking at classifying different projects and looking at the needs of your customer from that classification. Because if it is a smaller project, you don't want to go into the same depth of understanding the needs of your customer and your stakeholders as you would on the larger one, because the risk is lower. So it's all about understanding the risk and the impact that these decisions and the impact of the project on the organization. Now I want to get a little bit into the project charter, and the reason why I want to look at the project charter is because this is your mandate document. This is the document that, if you do correctly, will stand you in good stead for the rest of the project. Because this is the one that you negotiate with your sponsor and your client. It is normally issued by the project initiator, which is often a project. There are three types of projects, aren't there? Let me just go quickly through the three types of projects. The first type of project is a project that somebody says, hey, this is a good idea, let's go and do something. Let's do this because it will improve the business, it will have this impact, it will bring us in this kind of impact. So somebody initiates it because they think it's a good idea. That's the one type of project. It's one that's initiated, and then it gets an approval from the board of directors, or it gets approved from a general manager or a higher authority, and says, yes, it's going to impact it, we'll budget for it, we'll take the risk, and we'll go for this project. Right? There's a second type of project that actually says, hey, I want you to do this whether you like it or not. I can remember that project, it's still so clear in my mind. The Deputy Vice Chancellor came to me and said to me, the council has decided that self-development in IT is not cost effective. They have decided that. They didn't ask anybody, they said they have decided that. And he says, you will implement a project that takes us away from self-development. And there weren't any choices. I could either go into a partnership or I could buy a package. And that was the two alternatives. So it makes it very simple for a project manager. All I had to do was put two things on the table. What is it going to cost us, and what are the risks of going into a partnership, and what are the risks of going into or buying a package? And both of them ended up as being highly risky because it has such an impact on the organization. So that's the second type, one that a higher authority actually says you will do this. All right. So the first one, a project manager might initiate it, or some stakeholder might initiate it. The second one comes from the top of the organization and says, you have no choice, we're going to go and do this. Often it's because of survival of that organization, or a perceived survival of that organization. And the other one normally comes out of, the final one normally comes out of continuous improvement. Your third type normally comes out of a process improvement. In other words, during the evaluation and the brainstorming and the strategic planning sessions that executive management would have, they would say, wow, we have some scenarios that we'd like to follow, and the project manager is given a set of key performance indicators or a set of criteria or objectives to meet, and he would make a project around that. In other words, there are boundaries within that one, and he has to come up with some way of achieving of those objectives. So those are three types. But in all three, a project charter is absolutely critical. Firstly, it is a document that is issued by the project initiator or the sponsor and formally authorizes the existence of that project. And it provides the project manager with the authority to apply organizational resources and project activities. Now, do you remember that you said, I asked you how many people had functional organization? And I said to you, in a functional organization, the line managers are going to have possibly more influence and more authority than what you're going to have. It is the project charter that will give you the authority to override some of those decisions. So your project sponsor has to be high enough in the organization to be able to give you that authority. And if the project sponsor or the project client is not high enough in the organization, that project is often doomed to failure. The other thing that is very important in this part of the thing, and some of the other names that are given to it here, are the project initiation proposal an objective statement, an investment proposal. So there might be other names for a project charter. So where does it come from? How do you develop this project charter? Where does it come from? Well, it's going to come from a contract that a company might have. So they might have got a contract in. It might have come in from a statement of work. In other words, it might have come from some work that had to be done, both internally or externally. It might have come because of the organizational process assets, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, needed improvement, or it might have come because the enterprise environmental factors made some changes. Whatever it is, as a project manager, the development of the project charter is really your governance framework. It's the governance framework and the justification and the authority to do a project. So that was what a project charter is. The project charter gives you the authority you need to do the work. So remember that. Now, there are two inputs that you're going to see over and over and over again throughout the project. And that is the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational. Yes, Will, do you have a question? Will, can you speak? Oh, you've said so down here. Does a successful grant application provide for a charter in a macro sense? Then further charter to be developed for specifications. The way that I would probably see that, Will, is this. You get a grant to do a particular thing, and you would have a charter in the macro sense. I wouldn't go for a further charter. What I would probably say is what you'd want is a project management plan. And we'll talk now tonight the difference between the project management plan, which develops specifics, the specifics of a project, and the project charter. Okay, I think the project charter gives you as the project manager something to do, whereas the project management plan will actually give you the specifics of the actual plan. Okay, we got that? Now, let me get back quickly to the difference between the environmental factors. Yeah, it was a very good question. I agree with you. And hopefully it'll answer the question when I come to the project management plan. All right. The environmental factors tell you how the company does its business. All right. And that's done in policies and processes and systems. Okay. The other one, the organizational process assets, and those two terms are you will find in the PM book. That's why I want to explain them a little bit more. Tell you how your company normally runs its projects. All right. So that's a system or systems or your knowledge base on how your company normally runs its projects. Now, a project charter isn't complete until you have received the sign-off from the project sponsor or the senior management or key stakeholders. And now at this stage I want to just say something. And I think I said it last week as well. There may be a difference between your project sponsor and your project client. And I think I gave you an example of where a donor organization, say the European Union for example, provides money to do a particular job, and the executive officer is the client. He's the one that says how that money must be spent. In other words, he is responsible and accountable to a body to actually produce particular results for an organization. But somebody might provide the money. Now, the project charter must be signed off before you actually start on your planning, because this is the part that's important if you want to get your governance structure right while you're doing your planning. It's in your planning, however, that you're going to get, and this is where for Will's part here, it's in your project plan that you're going to have all these sub-plans. All right, and what you're going to find is that there's going to be a plan for each of those 9 areas that we actually talked about. And that would be your project management plan. But your project charter is something that is done in the initiation part, and it provides the governance structure and the authority to do the plan. Okay, so let's go on. In developing a preliminary scope, and this is part of your pre-planning if you like, in delivering that preliminary scope, you need to write down as much as you know about the scope to everyone that can do something about it. Okay? So this is where you bring your stakeholders in before you start your planning. So your preliminary scope will be done iteratively, and we'll talk about some of the iterative things in developing a plan in a minute. Okay, so in developing a preliminary scope, and we're going to go back and do scope planning later on. It's in fact we will do it next week. You need to try and define your scope right up in the initiation phase, in the project charter phase. And developing a preliminary scope statement is going to take your project charter. It's going to take all your environmental factors. It's going to take your statement of work, if you like, and your organizational process, and you will come up with some sort of preliminary scope statement. All right? And that's critical to start with. But it's not the end of your scoping. It's not the end of your scoping. It's not the end of the scope. Your scope will end when you have finished your planning. Okay? Now, in your planning phase, this is where you're going to develop your project management plan. And for Will, this is the part where you're going to, this is the differentiation between a project charter and a project plan. Your project, developing a project management plan will make sure that you are prepared for problems and you're prepared for change. Now, change might both be good and bad. Let me give you an example of a good one. I was quite friendly with a CEO of a very large construction company in South Africa, and I found a couple of stories that were pretty positive on that one. I think they won the contract to move the Johannesburg Stock Exchange from the middle of Johannesburg into Sandton, which was the newer area, the more elite area. It was Sandton. And this construction company actually won the contract to actually build a building. And they had planned pretty well in doing it, and they came to the end of the project and they had some money left over, which is unusual, and they wanted to do something for the client. And they went back to the client and they said, we have overestimated in certain areas, and we have, because of good days and we didn't have to worry about too many rainy days, we've actually completed the work ahead of time. What we would like to do is we would like to leave all your old equipment in the old building and actually buy you new equipment and furniture and all the technology to go with it in your new building. So what will happen is that on Friday afternoon you will leave with your briefcase and your coat, and you will arrive at your new building on Monday morning and everything will be there. Well, obviously the customer is going to be really happy with that, and obviously they're going to get good brownie points for that one, and that's exactly what they did. Now that is taking an initiation of where they could have saved the money, they could have done something else with it, but they took to their client and they said, look, we've got this, what do you want to do with it? Do you want us to do this for you? And that's exactly what they did. So that's change control in a very positive way. The only way that they could do that was to have effective planning up front. So I want to reiterate one more issue here, and that is that the project management plan is to prepare for problems and for change. Your project management plan has the following. Remembering that it is a living document and it details how the project will be performed as far as the scope management is concerned, your scheduling, your cost management, your quality management, your process improvement, your staffing management, your communications, your risk, your procurement, your milestone list, your resource calendar, your baselines, and your risk register. So your project management plan is the detail of how you're going to execute your project. Hopefully that makes sense. So you're going to come out and put all your project management processes, your preliminary scope statement, your project charter, your environmental factors, your organizational practice. You're going to put all of this together and you're going to come out with a defined, prepared, integrated, and coordinated subsidiary plans, 9 of them actually, in your project management plan. Now, this is where I said it's critical to understand that you're going to go through an iterative process to come out with a progressive and elaborate plan. So planning is not a short-term thing. It's something that takes time to actually do. If you take too short a time to do your project plan, you're going to end up without being prepared for the change or the risk that might come up out of it. So a project management plan is the core of the integration management. It is your main tool for running your project. Your project plan is the main tool for running your project. In the project life cycle, in the directing and management of the project execution is where the work is managed so that it gets done efficiently. So as a project manager, you're going to go into a cycle now of detailed planning, executing, and controlling. So although you have a project management plan, each phase or each little piece now needs to be planned in detail, and you'll execute it and you'll control it. So it goes into a cycle until the project is completed. Hello Debbie, I didn't see you come in there. It's good to have you here tonight. Alright, now the direct management and the execution process. The processes of executing the work defined in the project management plan to achieve the project requirements defined in the scope statement. Alright, so here what you're doing is you're taking your project management plan, you're taking approved requests, you'll put it in to your process, and you should get out work performance information. You should get out your deliverables that come out correctly and your implemented change requests. Remembering that in any project, the whole issue is to manage change. It's also to make sure that you do not have scope creep. If you can remember last week, I said to you the biggest monster you're going to have is scope creep. And somebody came up and said they have a 3% change within their change of scope creep. That means that you need to have a very, very, very good project plan and a very detailed one. Right. This is the phase where you're going to constantly look for problems in the project. And don't just look for problems. Look for ways that you can improve the project. The monitoring and control is where you're going to look through data, you're going to look through your information, you're going to try and identify areas that can be improved or areas that might have a high impact or might have a high risk. So this is where you're going to constantly look for things, and you're going to use the information that comes out of that. All right, the type of information that you're going to get are the request forms that you're going to get, the people performance, and various things like that. Now, I can't spend a lot of time on that one tonight, but we're going to look at it in more detail later in some of the other areas. The other area that's important is and coming out of this one, is your work performance information, rejected change requests, and your project management plan. Now, your project management plan is going to be your guide and your base for everything that you do. When you want to do it, it's your major tool, as I said. It is the project management plan that is the basis for what you're going to be measuring everything on when you're doing and monitoring and controlling your work. What should come out of this process is that requested changes are recommended, or defaults are repaired, or corrective action or preventative actions, or something is actually taken place. It's actually taken place. All right? It's the area that you're going to compare against your baseline, which is in your project management plan. You need to only make sure that only those changes that are necessary that will help your project, those are the only ones that you're going to change. If a change is going to implement and help your project, that is the only change that you want to make. So the only changes that you make in your project are the ones that are going to benefit the project. If something is not going to benefit the project, you do not want to make that change. Now, the final one is that integrated change control. In all the phases, if there's going to be a change, you need to document it. Even in the initiation phase, and your planning phase, and your management phase, or your execution phase, your control and your monitoring phases, you need to make sure that there's an integrated change control. So one of the things we're going to actually ask you to do is to look at your change control system from a holistic perspective, right from the start to the finish of your project. And that's where you're going to look at your approved and validated defect repairs. You're going to look at approved corrective actions and preventative action. So an integrated change control is critical for a project manager. Now, I've said this before, so I will finish off with it tonight. Make sure that you get, this is the area that you make sure that you get paid, that you make sure that the documents and lessons learnt, and it's all wrapped up. If you don't do that, most of your stakeholders will go away thinking that you have not completed your project, or you have not completed it successfully. So close the project out. And when you close the project out, you're going to take your project charter, your contracts, your project management plan. All of those are going to come through there, and you're going to wrap them up and archive them. And you're going to keep it for historical records. But most important of all is going to be at this stage is your lessons learnt. And a formal acceptance of the project. It's also where you're going to check with your customers and make sure that you get feedback for future reference. And that's where I am tonight. Are there any questions? I've gone a couple of minutes over, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take a few for now. No questions? Yes, Deborah. Can
you hear me?
Okay.
Oh, great.
Yes. You've got a microphone. Great. I can hear you. That's
You're
great.
very soft on
Okay,
this
Debbie.
one. Yeah.
Am I
don't
very
know how to
soft?
turn you up.
Wow. I better see. Can I ask? Has anybody else seen if experienced me as being quite soft tonight? Okay, Debbie. Then we need to look at your microphone and your.
Yeah, I do.
Have you got headphones on? Not. No. No. Very good on this end. Okay. So Graham is fine. Colin is fine. Okay. So then I think we're going to have a problem. I think the softness is going to be on yours. Okay. We've had some good feedback. Yeah. So I think.
Sorry, my question was: are we doing the question and answer session at 8 o'clock or? Okay, I don't think I got an invitation for that one.
Yes. Oh my. All right. Maybe I can put up that URL quickly. It will be the same as the one that you put in for this one. So it's that long one that you've got for that one. The last slash, before the last slash, it'll have BSBPMG521 and then it'll have a Q behind it instead of 22, or it'll have 2Q instead of 21 or 22.
2Q. Okay.
Yes. So it'll be 501A, 2, and then a Q.
Great.
All right. All right. I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to say I'll meet you at, depending on where you are, it'll be 8 o'clock for you in New South Wales. It'll be 7 o'clock if you're in Queensland. And I'm not sure what it'll be if you're in Western Australia.
Okay. Can you help me with the volume?
So I will meet you. Yes, I will certainly do that with you right now. What you must do, Debbie? Well, the first one is, have you got XP or you're using Windows 7? Vista. Okay, so that's similar to Windows 7. On your toolbar. Okay, do you have a hard switch or a volume control on your headphone or head speakers? Are you using speakers or a headset?
I don't have any volume control on the headset.
Okay, then it's going to be a soft one. Do you see a little speaker at the bottom of the bar?
Yep. I've tried
on your computer.
Adjusting.
Okay, click on that one. And is that one not at its fullest?
I've turned it all the way up, but it hadn't made any difference to your voice, the volume of your voice.
It hasn't made any difference to my voice. All right. The second thing to do is to right-click in the center of what you've got right now. So if you right-click, it should say Center.
Yep.
So go to the middle of your screen and right-click.
Yep.
And it'll say Settings. Yep. Let's look at those settings. All right. So it should have on there. Okay, there's only the microphone. So they don't seem to worry too much about the thing on that one. So that's okay. That's not going to help you too much. All right. The next thing that I want you to do is, you know that little pointer on that you get on Vista?
Say that again.
It says Show Hidden Icons. It says Show Hidden Icons.
Where am I going? I'm sorry.
There's a little pointing thing here. It's on the bottom toolbar.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. It says, all right, and then there will be a pink loudspeaker. Yes, I think it's a pink one. I can never really tell whether it's peach or pink. It's not really red. Is there one that's in that little block? If you do that.
I don't have a pink loudspeaker.
Okay. Okay, you don't have one. All right. One more thing that I think
You're actually getting a lot softer.
A lot softer. That's not good at all. No. Okay. One other thing that you can do. Now let's go back into the bottom of the screen. And that's the screen that the Connect Pro screen, where it says Talk You see that little down
Yes.
arrow? It says voice options. Alright. Make sure that that's on high volume. And voice on multiple
And what, sorry?
speakers. Make sure that that's on. Whoa, now
Yeah,
you
that
sound
turns up my
loud
volume,
now.
but it doesn't seem to do
Okay,
yours.
make sure that that's on high volume. It
No.
didn't do much for mine. Oh dear. That's going to be a problem. Okay. Alright, I've run out of options on
I could
that
hear
one,
you
I'm
quite
afraid.
well the week before last when I was at home using this headset, but
You could. Are you at home at the moment? Alright. Okay. I'm going to go and look up some things for you, Deborah. When you
Okay.
come back, I'll try
Yes,
a few
that'd be
other things.
great.
Is that alright? Let me see if I can
Okay, so
improve on that. And then I'm going to say goodnight to you all the rest of you that are still on. And then I'll
10
see you at 8 o'clock if you're in New South Wales, 7
Great.
o'clock if you're in
Thanks.
Queensland. Thank you,
Good night.
and good night all.